first heart transplant has been performed. Medical history has been made in South Africa.
Is he talking, doctor?
No, they're still breathing for him. We'll take the tube out now in the ward and then he'll start talking. He's conscious.
One day in my office, there was a knock on the door, and there was a guy there. He said, "Do you know there's a black guy?" He was around that time, and he was very closely involved in the first heart transplant. That's when I discovered that Hamilton was retired and living on a pension of a gardener.
Are we talking about the first actual human transplant? Did you physically remove the heart from the first donor?
Look, I remove it. Only because the law of this country, I was not allowed to doing myself. And now I was so happy because now the truth is out.
Wafana yulinduti myamchini ngapezwindaba wafana yulinduti myam yaisheni ngapezwindaba wafana yulinduti myam yaisheni ngapezwindaba yamamazi nduti myama wena yamamazi nduti myam it asiwezingabi bezwendaba yamamazi nduti myama wena yamamazi nduti myam it asiwezingabi bezwendaba.
That's me and Chris. I always knew, there was a great story in Chris Barnard, and, that I wanted to be the man to tell the story. So, I always thought there was somebody who had to tell his story.
Woman, you absolutely loved him. He did so much for people, and he saved so many lives.
So, he did me a favor by actually dying before I made the movie, because now I can tell stories that that he's, don't have to approve, So there's always good in tragedies, You can always find the good out of a tragedy, Chris grew up in Beaufort West. Now that is a very Afrikaans community. It's in the Karoo. His father was a minister in the church and he preached to the coloureds and the blacks. Chris used to pump the organ, for his mother was the organist and his father was the preacher.
I think my father was poor, but it was kind of a happy poor. The big thing with the poverty came out more because of the two churches that there were. You know, there was the Afrikaans white Dutch Reformed church in the apartheid time, and then the coloured Sendeling-kerk, which is the missionary church, and his father was part of that church. And so the Dutch Reformed minister, they were quite wealthy, and his father and his family weren't all that wealthy. So it maybe came from that contrast, I think.
He had a difficult childhood in that the Afrikaner white kids called him a kafferboetie, which means a brother of the black man.
Sy baie dankie. Jy kan maar gaan sit.
He didn't really like it. He was not very comfortable. He used to come home crying.
Skryf gewoonlik daai 20 daar by die ponde neer.
And his mother told him, look, my boy, one thing that you must do, and that is, when you run a race, you must always be first.
266 pond.
Whatever you do, you must always be first.
1 penny.
And that is the one way you're going to close their mouths. And of course, as later history showed, he was first.
Ngela xesha lakhe bemhlophe yayinguye owayeba unesibindi sokuyenza kuqala into noba thina singafiki sikho nje aphumile kuqala apha kuthi awungena kulaa ndawo naso into sasimthanda ngayo uba akoyiki. Ekucaciba lo mntana xa ibingengomntana uNakelo xa ingengomntana womntu obomvu ngewayefunde waphuma entweni ebalulekileyo. Ubutyebi bokuqala kaloku benkuqala wayezinkomo babetyebile yiyo nale nto babengafuni umfundisa kwakungekho nto baxakeke yiyo. Babetyebe ngolo hlobo babengakhathalele nto yakufunda nanto yasikolo. Babembeke ngoba uba unoba ufunde uzawufundiswa umntana uyaba letshipa sobaphinda abuye ngaphangela. Babeme kuloo nto bo. Emeko wethela uba into enjalo wayikhulele kumzotyebileyo ngenkomo.
Hamilton grew up in the village of Tsantani. You know, with certain ceremonies, they got a slaughter. Hamilton told me that he was always fascinated when they used to slaughter a goat. So he was always very fascinated with it. And I think that when he got the opportunity to work in the animal lab, you know, his brain clicked in again.
Isibindi sakhe simnyama akayoyiki into ukuyenza noma injani akanamsebenzi uyayenza qha. Uzeke simthi igama sethi ngohlakaza umfiko kuba into uyayidlakaza ngayinjalo akayibali noyibala akayikhathalela.
Every poor kid has got to fight for himself. Chris had to fight for survival in a small town where most of the Afrikaans boys were against him.
10, 40 en nog 10 gee vir ons 60. En die 2 van die 100 gee vir ons.
He was hiding under the mulberry tree. And a girl jumped in under the mulberry tree. And her leg touched his leg. And he felt this anxiety in him. Now I think that Chris's notorious love affairs in the future all started under that mulberry tree.
He was a very brilliant student at school, so maybe that was where the love started.
Chris was very fond of money because he had so little when he was young. That is why he became a doctor, not to become a famous heart surgeon, just to earn a good living to help the family.
Ya sasiya phaya sisiya kubantu abahlala emahholweni phakwala amadoda amadala alapha apha ebulalini sasiyakufikela kuwo ke phaa safika sahlala kuwo safuna umsebenzi phaa siphaa kuwo ngoba ngelaa xesha ke xa ungekasebenzi utya kula madoda asesebenza uphuwe neemali ke uba ukwazi uzithengela into zikendleleni ngala madoda asebenzayo.
The Nationalist Party got into power in 1948. The apartheid wasn't born after 1948, it was there long before 1948. It was called racial discrimination then.
Ekapa sasiphila ngolu hlobo loba ubuya kuthi emsebenzini sibuya siziphekele umphokoqo sivube ngawo xa sivela emsebenzini sitye silale sivuke siphinde siphangele siphinde sibuye sitye kwalaa mphokoqo. Uyabona ngonje ke empelaveki ngemigqibelo apha ngeweekend siye sasithenga iintloko zeenkomo esiraheni intlalo esasithele ngayo phaa senzela ukuba ke sikwazi uba sibe sitye inyama sipheka ezo nyama phaa ngamagogoko phaa phandle.
I personally, as an Afrikaner and as a nationalist, thought it would work. I thought separate development would work. Chris was an Afrikaner with an Afrikaner background. His language, his household language was Afrikaans. He was a true Afrikaner. I always liked Chris. Chris was a real man's man. We were fishing together and see if we can pick up girls on the beach and things like that. You know, that was a full-time occupation. He played the ukulele. I played the guitar. We used to sing dirty songs together. You the lace and my tacky, you the captain and crew, you to me a necessity. Oh honey, I'll be lost without you. Ba-ba-da-doo.
My mother was the disciplinarian, but in a good way, and my father was more the easygoing person. And I think that also complemented them because you had a bit of both worlds. In those days, a lot was written about him in papers still as the young Dr. Barnard, and he did a lot of work with children, and we were very aware of the work he was doing. And there was a lot of mitral valve and valve replacements. In fact, my mother made the valves because she sewed very well.
Now, we've got an unusual family situation here. Most wives sit home and knit for their husbands, and Mrs. Barnard, you seem to be doing something altogether different. What are you doing exactly?
I'm covering heart valves for my husband.
He went to the States as a young doctor, and he went first alone, and then my mother and myself and my brother joined him later. We went over in a cargo ship to New York, an old cargo ship. I remember it very well. And my mom found it very cold there.
But it does remind me of the time when he was here in Houston. He was my guest at the Heart Institute. Here is Christian Barnard in my home in Houston. Here, Barnard, that's myself, and these are my 2 daughters here. I had 5 daughters. He was very fascinated with all my beautiful daughters. Well, I told him hands off.
At 48 years old, Dr. Cooley already enjoyed a worldwide reputation as a superbly skillful technician and innovator long before he ever did a transplant.
I do remember him being exceedingly bright and very inquisitive about what was going on, and seemed to be really admiring what we were doing in our hospital.
Denton Cooley runs what they call a loose operating theatre. There's a good deal of gossiping, some levity, and music.
We, in our hospital here, we developed a very simple form of heart-lung machine, and we began using it in 1956, in April 1956. And from that moment forward, we had one of the most prolific open heart programs in the world.
I came to America by a complete accident at the time when heart surgery started. And I went to the school that led the world in heart surgery. And to cut a long story short, after 2 years, I had my PhD degree, and I also had an additional degree, the MS degree. I finished my training. I decided I would come back to South Africa and continue work here. And then I mentioned this to Professor Washkansky, and he called me to his office and said, well, he said, Chris, he says, you are now going back to South Africa. He says, and you probably will need some equipment there. So I said, if I could just get a heart-lung machine, it would be terrific, because I could start work straight away.
yena wayesebenza egadini phaa.
Boy, go.
Kanti njengoba beqaba namabala nje yena uzifunela umsebenzi phaa. Uyaweya lo. Ufuna ubheka phaa phakathi ehospital. Wayephungula apha kule gadi. Wayesebenza. Wathi ke ngoku hayi ndingena phakathi ngoku phaa. ekhosikele kanye sancoma loo nto ke thina ubukleva bakhe nguyawungena phaa.
When he got the opportunity to work in the animal lab, he accepted the job to clean animal cages. He thought he was going to have goats, and instead it was rabbits and baboons and mice and rats. So he definitely had an affinity with animals. Absolutely.
Hamilton was a very nice guy. He always was pleasant, he always laughed, we always had jokes. There was always a happy, jolly atmosphere in this laboratory. Hamilton had no training in medicine, but we taught him. I gave the injection. I then put the tube into the dog and then started ventilating the dog. There weren't any elegant anesthetic machines like now. You sat with a bag and you pumped and pumped and pumped, simulating breathing. And that was always Hamilton's allocated task. In those days, laboratory work was very important in surgical training. And every registrar trainee surgeon had to go through one period in the laboratory. And that was my period in 1958. And that is when I met Chris Barnard. That's when we first started open heart surgery. The heart-lung machine arrived, and that's where I met all the other workers in the laboratory. The first dog died, but after that we had a string of successes with dogs. And dogs weren't very amenable to this machine. In fact, I think some of us didn't quite know where we were going. Maybe Barnard knew where we were going, but we just carried on with the work and did the various operations to perfect the whole technique. And in fact, we were strongly considering doing human transplantation, even though the dog's results weren't all that wonderful.
It was like daily routine, you know. At that time, you must remember, the animal cruelty and the Greenpeace people, you know, weren't like today. Today, you can't operate on a cockroach without signing a form, you know. Those days, you know, there was no animal rights people, you know. I mean, you could go and catch baboons, monkeys, dogs, anything, and you could do research on them.
There certainly was a race on. That was all publicly known, it was in the press, and we in medical circles knew about it.
We knew that the Americans were ready to do it, and but we had practiced it ourselves. We weren't aware of it being a race at all. I just think that whoever had the circumstances right would do it.
We all wanted to be first, and to be the first person to do a heart transplant would have been quite an achievement.
kodwa siphi isitambo sakho sale ndawo usuka kuyo ongena sitambo ungazinikwa kwalapha benzima kwawuphangela sokuphangela funeka ubhenqe impundu pha yabaleka
Tata bengamfuni umntanakhe aye kwindawo asebenza kuyo ebengayisebenzisi loo nto kaloku bekuthiwa uyawuthi beke waya kwindawo esebenza utatakho ube lirhumsha so kuthuthi ke ngoku besingathanda usondela apha ecani kwam.
Sadutyulelwa pha asaphangela sasitayika kwakunzima ke ngaloo mini sasidutyula imimputa ndabona nalapha kumumpu ndabona ndibuya yaphuma apha imbumbulu sithi sibethwa sibhekwe station sibaleka siyakutshona phaa kwalanga and kwakunzima sasibethwa sidutyulwa bebulawa abantu kungekho noba kutheni hayi
I had a wonderful youth, and I think I'm very lucky because there was a lot of wonderful holidays that we had, and I water skied with my father, and he was my trainer. My father was a very easygoing person. Look, he had a temper, and you knew where you stood with that. He was hard, but then just within 2 minutes, a wonderful sense of humor that kind of cancelled out the strictness. We spent a lot of time in the animal lab just waiting to be taken home after school. We were in the animal lab often and we saw a lot of experimentation and operations that they did. Yeah, and that's how I also met Hamilton and all the people that worked there.
I've worked with Hamilton Naki from the very time I went to work there. We used to work in the research laboratory every Wednesday and Friday. He fascinated me because he always came to work dressed up like a real gentleman, as if he was going an executive, in his suit and his hat and his briefcase. Hamilton often used to assist Professor Barnard in the animal laboratory, start doing the anesthetic, and then he would open the chest of the animal. And he called Professor Barnard the big man.
Hamilton was an excellent laboratory assistant. When Hamilton stitched up a heart from one dog to the other, that heart never leaked. When Chris did it, it used to leak. He had to come back and do it again. His skill working with the animals and his attachment with Barnard, I think that the two of them coming together really had an effect on the first heart transplant. I came across a photo where Hamilton was operating on a dog and Chris Barnard was behind him watching Hamilton work. Chris could see it, that the heart transplant will work. But while Hamilton was operating, Chris was watching him. I don't know what went through Chris's mind, but he could certainly see that what Hamilton was doing was right and that it would work.
One day, Professor Barnard said to us, we are going to prepare now to do a human heart transplant. He said not to say much about it, keep quiet. The one thing he said was that the recipient had to be a very, very sick patient, and that the donor would have to be a white person. It was a Saturday evening at 11 o'clock. The phone rang, and I knew then that it was going to be that transplant that night. The operation started at about 1 o'clock in the morning. We had 2 theatres going at the same time. Professor Barnard was obviously opening the recipient and put him on bypass, cut out his heart. Simultaneously in the adjoining theatre was another surgeon to take the donor heart out. We had a potentially huge disaster when he said to Johan, go onto the bypass machine. Pump on was his words. Clamp the main arterial line. But he didn't say switch off the heart-lung machine. So the machine was pumping away at 5 litres a minute. And of course the pressure built up and the tubes burst off on the connection. And it was like a hose pipe pumping blood all over the theatre floor. We were frozen with horror because we had like less than 2 minutes to reconnect, get all the air out, and get the patient back onto the heart-lung machine again, or he would be brain damaged or die. Professor Barnard was as cold as ice. He just turned around and said, well, do this, reconnect that, recirculate, get all the air out, and stop the pump. And then he reconnected the lines and he said, go on bypass and start cooling the patient. I remember going up to the head of the table. I was amazed to gaze into this open chest that had no heart in it. It was just a big gaping hole in the chest. The heart had been taken out, and here was this patient lying, and all that was keeping him alive was this machine that was pumping the blood through his body. He sewed in the heart and started warming up the patient again, and slowly the heart started to show signs of life again. Professor Barnard turned round and he said, it's going to work.
The world's first heart transplant has been performed. Medical history has been made in South Africa. Newspapers everywhere carry banner headlines, and from medical men as far away as the Soviet Union, there is acclaim for the dramatic breakthrough. In 5 drama-filled hours, the heart of Mr. Denise Darvall, who was tragically killed in an accident, was transferred to the body of Mr. Louis Washkansky, a 53-year-old businessman suffering from an incurable heart disease.
Of course, everyone was envious of Dr. Barnard for being first. And looking back on it, there are several of us in this country who were involved in heart surgery at that time who aspired or were ready to do cardiac transplantation.
We became world news overnight. I remember going up to the medical school and Chris Barnard coming out with a wad of cables like that. He didn't know what to do. This was all, it was all too much for him.
We all ran in, the interns. I mean, we were probably very bad because we stole our way. We knew where they had the patient. We saw him sitting in his oxygen tent and amazed that this man is sitting there breathing with someone else's heart beating him. I think we were also, even though we were medical people, we were fundamentally pretty flawed.
I was lucky enough to get a second chance. Very few people do.
South Africa was, at that time, really in the doldrums. We were outcast. We were the skunk in the world. We needed something special. And when Chris did the first heart transplant, we all stood up and said, you see, this is what the Afrikaners can do, you see? We've got this terrible reputation of apartheid, but look what we can do.
The triumph was short-lived. In his room at Groote Schuur Hospital, Louis Washkansky took a backward step in his battle for life. He fought for breath as pneumonia invaded his body, made almost defenseless by the anti-rejection drugs.
Don't say anything. Don't say anything.
Yeah.
4,400.
Well, it was fine. Christian Barnard and his team began a series of desperate emergency treatments.
At the time, I would, respectfully suggest that you can...
Look at that there. That's all it's time. And this is when he got sick and he had pleural pain.
All sorts of people used to go into Washkansky's ward. The provincial administrator was allowed to go in, shake hands with him, well done, and all this sort of thing. And they were passing bugs on to this poor chap all the time. He died of infection in the end. And but all these people were allowed in. Cameramen, their cameras into the ward, taking pictures of him. Well, they learnt after that, he died, after a few days. But they then learnt that a heart transplant patient must be kept in isolation for quite a long while.
He was devastated when Washkansky died because he was doing so well at first. He was able to speak and he called Professor Barnard the man with the golden hands.
I think the hype was so high at that stage that it was a natural thing to go ahead and do another case.
On Tuesday, January 2nd, 1968, South African dentist Dr. Philip Blyberg was wheeled into the operating room of the Groote Schuur Hospital in Cape Town, South Africa. Dr. Philip Blyberg, a dying Cape Town dentist, was Dr. Barnard's next transplant patient.
He called us in and said to my husband, please don't change your mind. And my husband said, I was so touched that I couldn't contain my tears. He said, Professor, as much as I want this operation to be a success for my sake, so much more I wanted to be a success for your sake.
Are you looking forward to getting into the next ward, darling?
I'm looking forward to the end of the operation.
Moments later, this surgical team, captained by Dr. Christian Barnard, removed his heart entirely from his body and replaced it with the heart of a young man named Clive Postles. It was the second time within a month that Dr. Barnard had performed what has been called the ultimate operation.
Well, until that time, as far as cardiac surgery was concerned, Cape Town was probably one of the few places that I thought could never produce anything that spectacular. The concept of brain death was not established or had not even been accepted in this country. So when Barnard revealed this possibility of taking a heart from a brain-dead individual, then it opened the way for those of us who were already doing heart surgery to follow in his footsteps.
For several months, Groote Schuur has been the focus of world attention. Soon, that hospital's most famous patient will be released.
And I'm looking forward to the sea and the open country, you know, when you've been confined for almost more than 3 months.
Anxious for a better view, a stream of pedestrians surge after the car in which Dr. Philip Bleiberg will leave. Professor Chris Barnard, leader of the team which has captured the imagination of the world, comes out to say goodbye. A simple handshake closes one of the most exciting chapters in the history of medicine.
Well, it was one of the most exciting events in the 20th century. It was hard to conceive at the time how one could remove a beating heart from one individual and use it for transplant. But how could a man have enough courage to take a beating heart out of another individual? Had he failed, he would have been really criticized badly.
Eventually uba kuthiwa intliziyo iyakwazi ufakwe emntwini andayazi uba ndathi ngaba le nto inokwenzeka njani kuthiwa intliziyo yaphaa izofakwa komnye umntu ikonektwa njani phaa kulaa nto. Yinto esazimamela nje sikude kunayo phofu siyiva apha ezindabeni kuba kuyaqhaqwa phaa eRhosken.
Utata uNaki njengokuba naye ebewenza la msebenzi lo kwenza uqhaqho ufake lo nhliziyo lapha kwelacala, so into ibisenzeka ebesithi umuntu xa emnyama nokuba wenza uphina umsebenzi olulutho eluntwini, uyaqonda, so ebengathathelwa ntweni, ebengayinikwa la respect limfaneleyo, uyaqonda. So yonke into ebeyenza ibithathwa inikwe kuthathwe omnye umuntu afakwe kulaa ndawo baye mayibe ngathi nguye lo unebe nabo ababuchule, ngoba kaloku yena ebetheni bengafundanga.
Ngoba uChris Barnard wayexela nje ubusebenza naye uChris Barnard sibaqhaqa abantu phaa. Ndoyika leyo uba beqhaqa abantu ke mna nomnuko. Mna into ndayibuza kuba xa kuqhaqa naye ke uyakwazi njani uqhaqa ungakhange ufunde, ubuva ufundele phi lo msebenzi, ufundele kwalapha eRhosken. Uthi ke hayi azange ndikufundelanga ndiyakubona ngokwenziwayo no andakayizilate zonke.
Are all these men that you have working on this dog now trained surgeons or doctors?
No, they're not. I can give you an example of Mr. Hamilton Naki. He's been working here for approximately 9 years. His official position is he's the laboratory attendant, and most of his work is to see that the equipment is clean and to go around to deliver messages and things like that.
Isizathu soba bangahlonitshwa kuyayingcinazela ngelaa xesha ngoba noba wenza ntoni ongumntu omnyama akufunekanga into yakho ibonise uba kaloku ifunisa uba uhlanga olumnyama malithathwe njengomntu ongazinto. So wayengenawukwazi ke nayo uyinikwa loo nto zange ayinikwa ngenxeni yantoni yebala naye even njengangokuba ubhubhe nangoku engenanto.
How did it feel when you first saw your husband's pictures on the covers of international magazines for the first time?
Well, you know, I thought he was just a normal man, and now I really think he's good looking.
He was a man's man. And of course, he was a ladies' man. Women loved him and he loved women. We know with all the love affairs he had, he was a very attractive, virile young man. Not a young man, he was 46, 47. He should have already started cooling off, you know, but he seems to... yeah, I don't know what his genes are made of, but you know. But he really liked women.
My father had met Dean Martin and had arranged that I stay with them for a while. So staying there, I met Frank Sinatra and Rachel Welsh and a lot of people. So that was quite, you know, I enjoyed that. And it wasn't always easy because I was quite big and fat. I was like a big Russian discus thrower. You know, from skiing you get big muscles. And then all these beautiful people with Gucci and Pucci and everything. And so I didn't fit in so well because I had little homemade dresses. But I think I relied on my personality. And that got me through all the Gucci Pucci business.
Chris used to walk around in old shabby suits and shoes and things like that. The moment you got into the higher echelons, it was all tailor-made suit, Italian suits, suede shoes, very, very, very posh. Chris was like an 18-year-old winning in the Miss World competition, you know. Didn't know how to handle it, you know. He was invited to Dallas to go and speak to like 1,000 doctors. And Loki went with him. And he got a letter from Gina Lollobrigida telling him how much she loved him and she can't live without him. And then he treasured this letter. He put it in his briefcase. He didn't tear it up. When he's out in the lecture room, he suddenly realized, hell, the bloody slides are missing and the letter of Gina Lollobrigida is in the briefcase in his hotel room. So he pardoned himself from the meeting, took the lift up, and he got into his room. Loki was sitting with Gina Brigida's letter in her hand in the window. She was ready to jump. So, you know, he made a few excuses, got the slides, grabbed the letter out of his hand, and then went down. So now, Chris tells me, he says, now can you imagine, I'm lecturing to 1,000 doctors. And I got one eye on my audience and one eye on the window. I'm expecting somebody to go like that. He says, how can you lecture and expecting your wife to jump from the 20th floor any minute?
was desperately sad when my parents got divorced. Because suddenly, with all the media interest in everything, suddenly my father actually belonged to the world. And then things just started changing. That's when I actually lost my father to the world.
He was married to Barbara, which was 18 when he married her. And he was 50 something. She was like one of the most beautiful looking women in South Africa. She was a model. And the money, of course, you know. It was a good catch for him. But he couldn't keep the pace with Barbara. I was shocked because I wasn't invited. He sort of kept his old pals out of the picture, you know. His old friends, we were a bit cross with Chris that he sort of left his old friends and, you know, started going his own way. You know, we felt that he sort of thought that we weren't in the same class as he was, you know.
Well, he started off being quite a liberal sort of a person. He had a very liberal outlook. And his politics changed after he married Barbara. So her father, Fred Zollner, was pro-nationalist, and he persuaded Chris to follow suit, which he did. And in the end, Chris became quite a rabid nationalist. The first two transplants had gone well. The donors' relatives gave permission for the heart to be used in transplants, but not so in the third one. The common-law husband and another relative didn't even know that she was dead. It went that far. They demanded the heart back. They said, it is in our culture that you don't bury a body without the heart. Heart is part of the body, and it must be buried with it. And well, of course, that wasn't possible. It had a horrific reaction right through the townships. The warning went round very rapidly to all the townships, don't go to Groote Schuur Hospital. The surgeons there will take your heart, use it to keep a white man's life going, and without anybody's permission, and don't go there. And they didn't. I doubt very, very much whether Chris Barnard would have used a white donor's heart without permission. I pointed out to Chris that he was playing with dynamite. He was playing with political dynamite. In taking the heart of a black woman, putting it into a white man, to sustain his life, to prolong his life, without permission. This caused widespread unrest all over the world. Everybody now had to look at this issue of organ transplantation from a moralistic and ethical point of view, which they hadn't perhaps done before.
My father was very against apartheid. In the apartheid days, where you had intensive care patients, and they had a ward for the white patients and a ward for the non-white patients. And he just said no, all his patients will go in one intensive care unit, and any nursing sister will be there, whether she's black, white, pink or blue, because he uses the best people to nurse. And it was a big controversy, and he just had the courage of his convictions to stick his neck out and actually do it and ignore the rules and regulations. So for me, what comes across from my father is the courage of his convictions.
I've received a lot of credit and a lot of praise for what was done in doing the first human-to-human heart transplant in South Africa. And I think that my surgical colleagues on my right there, if I can still see them and they can see me, will agree with me that as surgeons we work inside the body. And inside the body everybody looks the same. I believe in it to such an extent that if I cannot continue my work in Cape Town, I will move to a different center where I can continue my work. No. And I'd like to ask you, as a multiracial organization, to assist us to continue the work we believe in.
Yeah, boy.
Look, in this cup right over here.
Okay, got it. Hamilton Naki, he had the experience of seeing different top surgeons. He saw how their hands moved. He had an appreciation of like time and motion because he saw you did something and you tied a knot a certain way which enabled you to keep going, and how you changed from your one instrument to the other, and that he'd pick that up. Hamilton Naki was my teacher. He and I, when we spoke, it was like a total equal confrontation. And certain people may have had an upbringing where they just couldn't handle the words of a black man. That's their problem. But we would have people where Hamilton would become most subservient, okay, and say, Master, sir, I think you should turn the liver this way. The anastomosis will be so much easier. And the guy would bark back at him, no, my boy, we do it like this. And Hamilton would say, but sir, I really think you should turn it like that. He'd try one more time. Please, sir, I think you'll find, no, boy. And then he'd back off. He knew that A, the surgeon would struggle big time, and B, the smart guys, men and women, would listen to him. I was suturing an end to side anastomosis of a vein. And in my mind, under the operating loop with some magnification, I could see a gap. Hamilton said to me, tie it off. And I said to Hamilton, because I saw the gap, I said, Hamilton, there's a gap there, I've got to put another suture. He said, no, I'm telling you, tie it off. When we let go of the clamps, it was actually a bad idea because I did not appreciate, and I know it sounds fundamental, but he had seen hundreds of anastomoses as they dilate, and he knew exactly that we could just manipulate it and the thing was perfect without the extra suture. I wouldn't be surprised, because he was such a charismatic person and that, if he virtually was taking care of where he lived, quite a few of the people, and almost had a clinic, I'm sure.
abangamagqirha ke ngoku. Yabona ke ngoku nje ke iye yenyuka apha kuye ke yanikwa kakhulu. Xa unikwa ke ngoku into unikwa ngamalowo izoba nkulu kuwe. Kukangako ke ngokwazi ukwenzela imisebenzi ibingenziwa ngabantu bonke.
Into beyithanda kakhulu tata inatsa xa unatsa iBhayibhile ufutha ukufunda into zecawe so iBhayibhile. Nothi xa kwenziwa ingoma soze utata umbone wona unatsa ehleli nje. Beba ngumuntu onomdla. Isikolo ke bedibana so kakhulu. Ngoba lonke ixesha udibana efunda iphepha. Awutata ngokwamehla angasaboni nje. Athi hayi mntana umuntu ufunda athi hayi kuyophela ixesha la.
Basuke mdubane phezu kwentaba sikhudla izintaba sesikhudla mawa siyakona emshintshini sasuke mdubane phezu kwentaba sikhudla izintaba sesikhudla mawa siyakona emshintshini.
Hamilton was a very warm, very friendly person. I think one could say very easily that he was non-judgmental. He accepted people as he found them. He had quite a good sense of humor. He was a very religious man. It was extremely important in his life. And also education was extremely important in his life. The baby in the pram was mine, and I took her to the laboratory, and Hamilton was very instrumental in helping to bring her up. He had the remarkable facility that when we were operating at the table, and if she was squeaking in the pram, he would actually be able to continue operating very successfully with one hand and rock the pram with the other hand. And he's probably the only surgeon in the world who's ever either had to do that or was able to do it. We were all very friendly in the laboratory, and we sat down and ate together and talked together and so on, but it never extended to any other sort of socializing. The colored students were not allowed to attend an autopsy on a white body. They were allowed to attend if the organs were taken out of the body and the body was put back in the fridge. There was no way that I could at that time have invited anybody of color to my home. It would have caused problems for everybody. I always felt a lot guilty about the way that he lived in comparison with the way that I lived, and there was nothing that I could do about it. When he came down, he lived in what were called single quarters for unmarried men, and certainly with no running water, and certainly with no outside toilet. So you could see it from the back, and it looks like a prison. It's just a great big concrete building with a couple of windows in it.
At the time with the Soweto uprising, I was shocked. I mean, I didn't think it was right what was happening. I had a great problem with the South African police. Not with the government, but with the police force. The police force at that time was really very, very corrupt. They were very tough and they were very corrupt. Chris had a lifestyle that he had to keep up now. The government was in the dog box, and when they heard you're from South Africa, you were thumbs down. So, if you could improve the image of the country, then why not? And get paid for it.
He was the best known South African worldwide. So if he was speaking their language, well, what better ambassador could you have?
I don't think that he agreed with the nationalist government. It was not political, it was financial as far as Chris was concerned.
He was in the pay of the government at one time, in the way of travelling expenses and that sort of thing, and expenses incurred, hotels, all that sort of thing. They would have paid all that, I should think. And just for the sake of having him talk their language overseas. It's a good way of spreading the apartheid gospel.
Unfortunately, he developed severe arthritis in his hand and could not operate comfortably any longer. And those things made it necessary for him to withdraw from surgery. And then he gets himself involved in some other activities which are not quite as ethical as practice of medicine.
Chris had arthritis in his hands, so for him to do the physical work, to take the tongs and put the needle in, pull it, and, it was painful. That's why, he nearly killed Washkansky because he had a pain when he had to put the two tubes, when he had to connect the heart-lung machine. Chris nearly blew it, he nearly killed him. But, Hamilton was to do the physical work, and Chris used to stand there and say, try this, do this, do that. Chris told him, and in the end, Hamilton, he could do it better than anybody else. He taught hundreds of doctors, there's no two ways about it, surgeons.
Any young surgeon who became a top consulting surgeon at Groote Hospital, 80 to 90% of them went through his hands in the lab. There was always rebellion amongst the personnel. Who's going to scrub? Who's going to monitor? Who's going to do this? Who's going to do the anesthesia? Well, Hamilton then would become the boss. What I'm trying to show you is that lab and the cohesion of those folk facilitated anesthesia research, kidney research, transplantation research, cardiac research, liver research, gastric research. It was phenomenal.
Half the world came to visit us. Everybody wanted to come to Cape Town and see where Chris Barnard had done the work. At that stage, if you trained in the Department of Surgery, you could go anywhere in the world. And you said, I trained in the Department of Surgery in Cape Town, and they'd open the door and they'd say, come and work with us. Because they knew that South Africans worked hard and they'd been excellently trained.
Ye wafana yule nduti myamhleli ngaphezu kwendaba man. Ye wafana yule nduti myam yayihleli ngaphezu kwendaba. Ye wafana yule nduti myam yayihleli ngaphezu kwendaba. Yemazi nduti myama wena, yemazi nduti myam.
I personally had a conscience. And the moment when de Klerk said that they were going to have one man, one vote in South Africa, You know, you immediately your conscience is clear. You say, right, at last now, we don't have to go around the world like a lot of bloody skunks, you know.
I remember the streets, everyone excited and singing in joy and everything, because now for most people who sort of understood politics, it meant freedom. And that was the hope that most people lived in, that one day we would get the freedom we've always wanted. So that was something huge.
The changeover was quite harsh to me. The good days were over. I mean, let's be honest and frank about it. I mean, you know, apartheid days were very good for me because I knew the right people, and I was privileged. I mean, you know, I got what other people didn't get because I think I was a likable man and a good nationalist, you know.
I met him through mutual friends. At the time, he was already divorced from Barbara, and I felt very sad for him because he was still, you know, sort of struggling to get over the divorce from Barbara. I've got a photograph where I'm sitting on Chris's lap when I was 6 years old, and that was after he wrote One Life. And so my mother had the book autographed and then took a photograph of me sitting on his lap. And I was 6 years old. Now, if you had to tell whoever was there that day that one day I'm going to marry this man and we're going to have 2 children, we would have said this is absolutely crazy. He had great respect for women. He was a real gentleman. And he, unfortunately, just loved beautiful women. That was all.
Maybe he was fascinated with youth. He always said that old age is a disease. And it was really, it was kind of an obsession and a fascination with him to see if you can't, you know, it was a challenge for him to see if you can't get something that's going to keep you young.
So now today I also have a problem and I want you to help me talk about it. This first problem is, you know, that I have had some experience in the treatment of heart disease. And of course, I've also had some experience, as some newspapers told you, with the use of condoms and Viagra. So I want you to help me and tell me, would you like to hear today from me about sex or heart disease?
You know, they had a Chris Barnard wine in Europe. They had a Chris Barnard cheese. I think they had a Chris Barnard spaghetti, you know, whatever, you know. And everything was healthy, you know. And if you eat Chris Barnard spaghetti, you'll never die of a heart attack. But I mean, the fact that it carried his name was sort of the money side of it that charmed Chris. Money was very important to him. And I think you could buy his soul, you know, for money, yes. Not everything, but some of it.
I think the divorce was very traumatic for both Chris and myself, but also because, you know, it came at a very late stage in his life. I can assure you that if he was 20 years younger, he would have taken it much better. But it was, unfortunately, you know, a sad ending, and it was a very difficult time for him.
It was kind of that, I think somebody perhaps that was so famous, you know, suddenly it's becoming emptier life. I think he realized that how sad divorce was for him now and for his children. I think he realized what it must have meant for us as well when we were younger, and I think he didn't realize what an impact it had on us then, but towards the end of his life he definitely did, because he talked a lot about divorce and families breaking up.
I spoke to him every day, and I said, Chris, how are you? You know, and he said, I'm very lonely. I said, get yourself a girlfriend, man. And he said, no, he says, he's just feeling very down and very lonely. That was the night, and then the next morning I phoned him again. About 9 o'clock that morning I phoned him and I said, how are you, Chris? Are you chirping up a bit? He says, I'm sitting next to the swimming pool, he says, but I'm not feeling too well. Well, 3 hours later, he was dead.
You know, there's a wonderful song in Afrikaans about, it's a David Kramer song called Skipskool. Shame. And when I think of my dad, that's for the end of his life. It says, it's in Afrikaans, but I'll translate it. It says, a piece lies here and a piece lies there. The pieces of my life are mixed up everywhere. And that was the end of my father's life, and was very, very sad for him.
Medical history has been made in South Africa. Newspapers everywhere carry banner headlines, and from medical men as far away as the Soviet Union, there is a claim for the dramatic breakthrough.
I was the biggest television producer in South Africa. And one day in my office, there was a knock on the door, and there was a guy there, black guy. He said to me, are you Dirk de Villiers? I said, yeah. He said, are you doing a documentary on Chris Barnard? I said, yes, I'm doing a documentary on Chris Barnard. He said, do you know that Chris Barnard didn't do the first heart transplant, but a black man did? I said, really? If that is true, then we've got a tremendous story.
It was a shock, obviously, to learn that my father was a part of that heart transplant that had made the news, you know. That was everything that people talked about those days. Just transplanting a heart, that's something big. He just said that he was helping Chris Barnard with the transplant, and the man he was, he didn't really like to blow his own horn, you know. He wouldn't go into details about how much big a role he played, you know. So he would just brush it off and make it like, no, he was, anybody could have done that, you know, that type of thing, until we really understood what was happening.
Because of Chris Barnard's documentary I was working on. So everything around the first heart transplant excited me. And Hamilton was around that time and he was very closely involved in it. Chris said blatantly on camera that Hamilton most probably was a better surgeon than him. Not a better doctor, a better surgeon.
He was a very capable young man, and I gave him to do more and more and more, and eventually he could do a heart transplant, sometimes better than the junior doctors who came there. And he eventually moved away from me and went into the laboratory where they did liver transplants. Now, liver transplant really is a very difficult surgical procedure. And he learned this too, in that today he can do heart transplant and he can do liver transplant. I can't do liver transplant, but he can.
I didn't want anybody to discredit Chris for what he did. So the reason why I went and got Hamilton, I wanted to check him out. That's when I discovered that Hamilton was retired and living on a pension of a gardener. I just felt at the time that it was unfair that Hamilton shouldn't get the recognition that he deserved. And then I got the newspapers in, and then we started putting Hamilton on the map.
It was something we never dreamt of, something we're not used to. Maybe if we grew up knowing that the media was interested in him, then it wouldn't be as big as it was now when it finally happened, because it was just so suddenly that every day there would be different people on our doorstep wanting to speak to him, and the interviews and things like that. It just happened overnight.
I can't recall him being there, but then there might have been, but I don't think he was there, no. Because, he didn't have a telephone. He lived in what they called a location, and they didn't have telephones, so there wouldn't have been a way to summons him.
He, of all people, was aware of the fact that it was quite an impossibility that he could have been in the operating theatre at that time, against the background of the political situation.
The main philosophy in medicine there was really not a racist one, and I think I don't think there'd be a problem in general of people that were working in the ORs if Hamilton was there and he's making a positive contribution, because you'd silence them in 1 minute and say, hey man, he's the only one who understands this technique.
About the first actual human transplant?
No, we're talking about the first one, the lung.
Did you physically remove the heart for the first donor?
Yes.
Tell me, in your words, what did you do?
I remove. I teach them. I working under with their names. I teach them. Nobody teach me here in South Africa.
But in this the successful first operation,
First success,
what did you do?
I was removing the donors. Heart.
Helping.
Help them.
Okay.
To move the donor to.
Okay. So I'm a bit confused. Did you remove it yourself, or you were helping others to remove it?
Look, I remove it because I teach them. You understand? Because only because the law of this country, I was not allowed to doing myself.
The fact that the two men got together is a reality, and that they work together is a reality and the truth. And who claims what, but the end result was a very successful heart transplant.
Lento mkhophayo ebewongwe yipresident uThabo Mbeki ePitoli. Even naye wayonwabe kakhulu kweza ntsuku exelela uba uzawuyapha. Yaqonda wayonwabe kakhulu watsho wathi futhi imithandazo yakhe iviwe ngoba bekudala enesinqala lanto ba wenze into uyibona into yakho kodwa kuncunywa umnye umuntu ngayo. Uyaqonda so wade watsho naye wathi no le into imithandazo yami ivake ndikwazi uba ndihlonitshwe naye ipresident. So kuqaleka kwam ukwaziwa njengomntu kulona urhulumente. Yaqonda so ndithi ukuthi wayonwabe kakhulu.
awarded to Hamilton Naki for overcoming the constraints imposed by limited formal education to make unassuming and exceptional contribution to the development of anesthesiology and the advancement of the science of organ transplantation.
We sat in front of TV the whole morning watching the ceremony. And when his name was finally said, then he got up there. We were so proud, you know. We wished we could just be there now in person.
I think what he achieved was quite remarkable. And he was very humble about it. He was never arrogant or anything, and he could easily have been, but he wasn't. He just felt that every single day he was coming to do his work as best he possibly could. And that was very admirable, because you don't meet many people like that.
It would have been much more exciting for him if it had happened like years before, when he was much younger and, you know, energetic and everything. But now every time he went, he would come home tired, and he couldn't really enjoy it the time it happened, with his age and his sicknesses and things.
Sakhathazeka kakhulu, ndakhathazeka kakhulu ngoba kaloku ngenamntu ebendiqonda ukuba besajonge lukhulu kuye njengomntu omdala, nanjengamntu ke noko ebendibane ndifuna kuye ulwazi, yaqonda, kwizinto ezithile ke zokhula njengoba umntu ekhula bemdala kum, yaqonda. So ndizama ukuthi ke noko ndalimala kakhulu kangokuba ndikilina kuxase
Hayibo, akulile nasike ngalo. Nako sosunyama qa.
Utata ubhubhe kwizinto ebendizijongile ukuba angathi noba uyasishiya abe ezenzile, zezi ngoku azishiya engakhange azigqibe.
Ungabakhathalele konke ubanje kwabana ababanikhathalele batoya get it. Hey. Oh. Wenda bona nje.
Mr. Hamilton Naki. Yeyiphi into umuntu ayaziyo ngaye ngalatata? Kuthiwa latata bethunana sesinesikolo, ndithi sinesikolo ngoku? Noba thina singaba siyaseya isikolo esisethu but sisikolo khona izikolo esizogqitha yona. Kuthiwa utata uNaki wayeyi-SGB. Siyamazi mos umuntu oyi-SGB ne? Ofana notata utata uMagqabi ne? Kuthiwa wayeyi-SGB utata uNaki ngelo xesha kwabe kufuneka kube khona izikolo ezakhiwayo ne? Kuthiwa utata uNaki wasizamela imali eCape Town xa ndawo ephangela kuyo ne? Wafumana i-10,000 then wahamba utata uNaki ngela xesha waye-SGB apha esikolweni wabheka eBhisho wasizamela imali ngaphethe seyokwenza ii-buildings eCape Town na ufana notata uNaki. Kuthi kakubuye umanto lo mntana ke tana usuka phi? Usuka elalini yaseNcerhana kuCentane. Ilali ekhangeleka ngathi iphantsi kanti ayikho phansi because ikhupha abantu abanjani abafana notata uNaki nayiva nabethina lona. Ngubani ke umuntu onothi hayi misi nandi ngayenza into ethile. Naki.